The last line of defense. Admiral Sarah Chen stood at the viewport of the ESS Defender, watching the swirling nebula that marked the edge of human space. The massive dreadnought's bridge was unusually quiet, filled only with the soft hum of instruments and the occasional murmur of status reports. Her weathered hands gripped the railing as she studied the tactical display, where hundreds of red markers indicated the advancing Nexus fleet. "They'll be here in 6 hours," Commander James Rodriguez reported, his dark eyes fixed on the holographic projection. "The Arcturus defense fleet is in position." But he didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew the odds. The Nexus had emerged from deep space 18 months ago, their massive biomechanical ships devouring everything in their path. They didn't communicate, didn't negotiate, didn't take prisoners. They simply consumed. Worlds, ships, entire civilizations reduced to raw materials for their ever-growing armada. The Galactic Confederation, humanity's supposed allies, had already begun their retreat to the galactic core. A strategic withdrawal, they called it. Chen's lip curled at the memory of the Confederation Council's final transmission. Their ambassador, a tall crystalline being named Zextal, had spoken with practiced diplomatic grace about preserving civilization and fighting another day. "Status of the civilian evacuation?" Chen asked, pushing the bitter thoughts aside. "Arcturus colony is 80% cleared," Rodriguez answered. "But New Eden and the Galileo outposts are only at 40%. We need more time." Chen nodded slowly. Time. It always came down to time. The Nexus didn't rush. They didn't need to. Their ships moved with the inexorable patience of glaciers, knowing their prey would eventually tire, break, flee, just like the Confederation had. "Admiral," a young lieutenant called out, her voice tight with urgency. Priority transmission from Fleet Command. The holographic display shifted, revealing the stern face of Fleet Admiral William Torres. His dark skin was creased with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with intensity. "Sarah, the Council has made their decision." Chen felt her jaw tighten. "Let me guess, they want us to join the Confederation's retreat." Torres' expression hardened. "They're calling it a strategic realignment of forces. The official order is to abandon the outer colonies and fall back to the Sol system. And the colonists we can't evacuate in time." Chen asked, though she already knew the answer. The silence from Torres was answer enough. "With respect, sir," Chen continued, her voice steady but firm, "I request permission to maintain position at Arcturus. The Nexus have never faced a force that stood their ground. Maybe that's why they keep winning." Torres was quiet for a long moment. Around the bridge, Chen could feel her crew holding their breath. Finally, Torres spoke, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. "Funny thing about transmission delays, Sarah. This connection seems to be deteriorating. I probably won't receive your response for several hours. Whatever decisions you make in the meantime." He let the sentence hang. Chen allowed herself a small smile. "Understood, sir. Connection does seem quite poor." The transmission ended, and Chen turned to her crew. Each face showed a mixture of fear and determination. They knew what staying meant. They'd seen the footage of what happened to ships that faced the Nexus. "Send word to all ships," Chen ordered, her voice carrying across the bridge. "This is where we make our stand. Not for the Confederation, not for the Council, but for every species that's been told to run and hide. The Nexus think we're just another civilization that will break before their advance." She paused, looking each crew member in the eye. "Let's show them how wrong they are." Rodriguez straightened at his station. "What are your orders, Admiral?" Chen turned back to the tactical display, her mind already formulating plans. The Nexus had never faced an enemy that refused to retreat. Their tactics were built around the assumption that their prey would eventually break. But humanity had a long history of defying expectations. "Contact the Galileo Defense Fleet," she commanded. "Tell them to begin mining operations in the Hades cluster. I want every asteroid rigged with antimatter charges. The Nexus want to treat this system like a buffet. Let's make sure every bite costs them. As her crew sprang into action, Chen watched the red markers of the Nexus fleet creep closer. In 6 hours, they would learn something that humanity had known for centuries. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy wasn't the one with the biggest guns, but the one who simply refused to accept defeat. Across human space, other commanders received similar orders, making similar choices. The Nexus were about to learn that humanity had its own form of inexorable patience, and unlike the Confederation, they weren't going anywhere. The war for survival was about to become something else entirely, a war of defiance. Defiance's price. The first wave of Nexus ships hit the Arcturus defense line like a tsunami of living metal. Their massive biomechanical vessels, each one a city-sized amalgamation of organic tissue and advanced technology, pushed through the initial minefield with devastating efficiency. But Admiral Chen had expected this. Multiple detonations in sectors 7 through 12, Rodriguez reported, his hands dancing across the tactical interface. Nexus capital ships are adapting to the mine patterns, but their support vessels are taking heavy damage. Chen nodded, watching as the massive enemy fleet split into smaller attack groups. The Nexus weren't used to losing ships. Their usual tactics relied on overwhelming force and the certainty that their enemies would eventually break. But humanity had changed the equation. Launch Operation Hydra, Chen ordered. Across the battlefield, seemingly damaged human vessels suddenly powered up, their reactors going critical. The Nexus, true to their nature, moved to absorb the energy signatures, only to find themselves caught in carefully planned kill zones. Lieutenant Maya Santos, the Defender's tactical officer, allowed herself a grim smile as the first explosion rippled through the enemy formation. Direct hits on 3 Nexus harvesters. Their biological components are having trouble adapting to the radiation surge. But the victory was short-lived. The Nexus, for the first time in their recorded history, began to change tactics. Their ships started moving in erratic patterns, sacrificing smaller vessels to probe human defenses. They were learning. "Admiral," Rodriguez called out, his voice tight. "We're getting reports from New Eden. The Nexus have deployed ground forces." The tactical display shifted, showing footage from the colony surface. The Nexus ground troops were unlike anything in their intelligence briefings, no longer the mindless consumption machines they'd faced before, but coordinated units that adapted to human resistance. They were evolving their tactics in real time. "They're testing us," Chen realized, her eyes narrowing. "Every defense we throw at them, every tactic we use, they're learning." The price of humanity's defiance was becoming clear. By refusing to retreat, they had forced the Nexus to evolve. The enemy was developing new strategies, new weapons, all focused on breaking the first species that dared to stand against them. Multiple breaches in the Galileo defense perimeter, Santos reported. "The Nexus are using some kind of organic EMP weapon. Our shields can't compensate." Chen watched as another human destroyer disappeared in a flash of light, its crew fighting to the last moment. The Nexus were adapting faster than anyone had anticipated, turning each human victory into a lesson in how to better destroy them. "Launch the firebreak protocol," Chen commanded. It was earlier than planned, but they needed to change the game again. Across the system, hidden installations began powering up, their energy signatures masked by the chaos of battle. "What about the civilian centers still in the blast radius?" Rodriguez asked quietly. Chen's hands tightened on the railing. "Send the evacuation code. Give them as much time as we can." The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but they both knew the alternative was worse. As the orders went out, Chen received a private transmission from Dr. Elena Volkov, head of Project Prometheus. The scientist's face was haggard, but her eyes burned with the same intensity that had marked her work since the war began. "The prototype is ready," Volkov reported without preamble. "But Admiral, you need to understand. What we've created, it's not just a weapon. It's going to change everything." Chen nodded grimly. "Good, because right now, everything needs to change. The battle for Arcturus had become more than a test of military might. It was becoming an evolutionary arms race. Humanity's ability to innovate against the Nexus's ability to adapt. And the cost of this defiance was being measured in lives, in worlds, in the very nature of both sides. As Chen watched another wave of Nexus ships emerge from FTL, she couldn't help but wonder if they had made the right choice. But then she remembered the footage from fallen worlds, from civilizations that had chosen to run. At least humanity would fall on its feet, fighting. All ships, she broadcast across the fleet. Execute firebreak protocol on my mark. Whatever happens next, remember, we are not just fighting for survival. We are fighting to prove that somewhere in this galaxy, someone will stand against them. That alone makes this worth the price. The Nexus were about to learn another lesson about humanity. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy wasn't the one who had nothing to lose, but the one who believed their cause was worth any cost. Unexpected allies. The firebreak protocol had changed everything. Where once there had been an orderly star system, now a carefully engineered chaos reigned. Artificial quantum singularities torn from the prototype weapons had shredded space-time itself, creating a maze of gravitational anomalies that even the adaptive Nexus ships couldn't fully navigate. But the cost had been devastating. 3 colony worlds evacuated, millions displaced, and the very fabric of space in the Arcturus system permanently scarred. Yet humanity had achieved something unprecedented. They had forced the Nexus to pause. Admiral Chen stood in the war room of humanity's last major shipyard, hidden in the depths of the Perseus Nebula. The tactical display showed the current state of the conflict, a stalemate that nobody had believed possible 3 months ago. The Nexus have withdrawn to the edge of the system, Rodriguez reported, now wearing the marks of a captain after his previous ship's destruction. They're watching. Gathering data, Dr. Volkov corrected, her hologram flickering slightly. Learning. Like they always do. Before Chen could respond, Lieutenant Santos burst into the room. Admiral, we're receiving transmissions. Multiple sources, all non-human, all non-Confederation. A holographic display shifted, revealing a series of faces Chen had never seen before. Species that had been considered too primitive or too weak to matter in the grand calculations of galactic politics. A being made of crystalline structures spoke first, its voice translated through harmonics. I am Zix of the Lumini. We watched as you stood against the Devourers. We watched as you changed the rules of space itself rather than submit. Another figure appeared, this one seemingly composed of living metal, not unlike the Nexus but clearly distinct. The Forge Collective has observed your resistance. You fight with innovation we thought impossible from organic beings. One by one, representatives of species the Confederation had written off as irrelevant came forward. The Korean, masters of quantum engineering but thought too peaceful to fight. The Meridian Swarm, biological savants who had hidden in deep space rather than faced the Nexus. Each had been watching humanity stand, and each had seen something that changed their calculations. We offer alliance, Zix continued. Not as the Confederation offered, not demands for obedience in exchange for false protection. We offer partnership. Each of us has something the others need. Chen studied each alien face, seeing in them what the Confederation had missed. The Lumini's mastery of crystal technology could revolutionize human shield systems. The Forge Collective's understanding of living metal could help counter the Nexus's biomechanical advantages. The Koreans' quantum engineering could enhance the firebreak weapons. The Nexus adapt to everything they face. The Meridian Swarm's representative chittered. But they have never faced true diversity. They learn from each enemy, yes, but they fight one enemy at a time. What happens when they must adapt to many? Dr. Volkov stepped forward, her eyes alight with possibilities. The quantum singularity tech could be stabilized with Lumini crystal matrices, and if the Forge Collective could help us understand the biological components of Nexus ships, we would need to act fast, Rodriguez cautioned. The Nexus won't stay confused forever. Chen looked at each alien face, then at her human colleagues. The Confederation had sought to preserve civilization through unity, forcing everyone to follow the same strategies, the same retreats, the same defeats. But true strength might lie in diversity, in the unpredictable combinations that arose when different species brought their unique perspectives to bear. "We accept your offer of alliance," Chen declared. "But understand, this won't be easy. Humanity won't back down, won't retreat. If you stand with us, you must be prepared for the same." Zix's crystalline form shimmered. "We have hidden long enough. The Nexus devour all eventually. Better to stand and fight with purpose than die running in fear." The Forge Collective's representative vibrated in agreement. "Your defiance has proven that they can be hurt, can be forced to pause. Together, we can prove they can be stopped." As the new allies began sharing technical data, Chen received a private transmission from Fleet Command. Admiral Torres's hologram appeared, looking both exhausted and energized. "Quite a coalition you're building, Sarah," he said with a hint of pride. "The Council's having fits. They never imagined their primitive species would dare to ally themselves with the humans who defied them." "The Confederation forgot something important," Chen replied. "Sometimes the most dangerous allies aren't the ones with the biggest fleets or the oldest civilizations. They're the ones who have nothing left to lose, or everything to prove." As the new alliance began to take shape, the Nexus continued their observation from the edge of the system. They had learned to adapt to human defiance, but now they would face something entirely new. The coalition bound not by fear or protocol, but by the shared determination to prove that the galaxy belonged to no single species. The war was about to enter a phase that neither humanity nor the Nexus could have predicted. Breaking point. The Nexus struck with a fury that shook the foundations of space itself. Their massive fleet, now evolved far beyond their original forms, emerged simultaneously across 12 systems. They had learned from the Alliance's tactics, adapted to their technologies, and now they came to end the resistance once and for all. In the command center of humanity's last major shipyard, now reinforced with Lumini crystal technology and Forge Collective living metal, Admiral Chen watched as the tactical display lit up with thousands of enemy signatures. "They've adapted to the quantum disruption fields," Dr. Volkov reported, her voice tight. "The singularity weapons aren't having the same effect anymore." Captain Rodriguez nodded grimly. "They're using some kind of organic space-time stabilizer, probably reversed engineered from studying our tech." The Nexus had always been dangerous, but now they were something else entirely. Their ships had evolved into nightmarish hybridizations of every technology they'd encountered. Crystalline growths reminiscent of Lumini tech sprouted from their hulls, while their weapons now incorporated quantum principles stolen from observing the Careen. Multiple breaches in the Perseus defense line, Lieutenant Santos called out. "The Meridian swarm colonies in sectors 7 through 9 are going dark." Chen watched as the tactical display showed ally after ally falling back under the overwhelming assault. The Nexus had learned not just to adapt, but to counter each species' strengths specifically. They were using Lumini-like crystals to shatter Lumini shields, corrupted biological weapons to turn the Meridian swarm's own biology against them. "Admiral," a new voice cut through the chaos. Zix's crystalline form materialized in the command center, their usual shimmer dulled. "We've lost contact with our homeworld. The Nexus, they're not just destroying anymore. They're corrupting, transforming." The main screen showed footage from the front lines. Nexus ships were no longer simply consuming worlds and resources. They were changing them, creating twisted versions of the technologies and biologies they'd encountered. It was as if they had learned not just to adapt, but to pervert everything they touched. "They're not just trying to destroy us," Dr. Volkov whispered, horror dawning in her eyes. "They're trying to become us, all of us, combined." The realization hit Chen like a physical blow. The Alliance's diversity, their greatest strength, had given the Nexus exactly what they needed, a blueprint for ultimate adaptation. By fighting together, they had taught their enemy how to use all their strengths at once. All remaining forces, fall back to emergency protocol Omega, Chen ordered, her voice steadied despite the weight of the moment. We need to regroup. But even as she gave the order, she knew it might be too late. The Nexus were pushing harder than ever before, and for the first time since humanity had chosen to stand, their lines were truly breaking. "Ma'am," Santos' voice cracked slightly. New signatures detected. Massive energy readings. It's the Confederation fleet. The tactical display shifted, showing the arrival of the massive Confederation armada at the edge of the battle space. For a moment, hope flared, until Chen saw their trajectory. "They're not here to help," Rodriguez said quietly. "They're here to contain the threat, both the Nexus and us." The Confederation had decided that the Alliance's resistance had made the Nexus too dangerous, too unpredictable. Their solution was brutal but simple: quarantine the entire sector, trapping both the Alliance and the Nexus within. Chen looked at the faces of her allies: Human, Lumini, Forge Collective, Kareen, Meridian Swarm, each showing their own version of desperation. They had fought together, innovated together, and now they faced extinction together. But as she watched the Confederation ships move to encircle them, Chen felt something else building. The same spark that had made humanity stand when others retreated, the same fire that had inspired their allies to rise from hiding. "Dr. Volkov," she said suddenly, "you once told me that the prototype would change everything. What if we changed it more?" Volkov's eyes widened as she caught Chen's meaning. The quantum singularities, with Lumini crystal focusing and Kareen engineering, we could create something new. Something even the Nexus couldn't adapt to because it would change the fundamental rules of space in this sector. "It would trap us too," Rodriguez warned, "if we survive at all." Chen looked at each of her allies. "We started this because we chose not to run. Now we have one last choice to make. We can die as the Confederation expects, taking the Nexus with us, or we can change the rules of the game entirely." Zix's crystalline form pulsed with renewed energy. The Lumini stand with humanity. One by one, each ally voiced their agreement. If they were to face their breaking point, they would face it on their own terms. As Chen gave the orders to begin the final gambit, she couldn't help but appreciate the irony. The Confederation had sought to preserve civilization through unity. The Nexus had sought to achieve perfection through adaptation. But here, at the breaking point, something else was emerging, a unity born not of conformity, but of shared defiance against impossible odds. The question was whether it would be enough. Dawn of unity. All units, this is Admiral Chen. Execute Operation Singularity. The command echoed across what remained of Allied space, in the heart of the Perseus Nebula, surrounded by the twisted abominations of the evolved Nexus fleet and the looming presence of Confederation warships. Humanity and their unlikely allies prepared to rewrite the laws of physics themselves. Dr. Volkov's voice crackled through the command channel. "Quantum matrices are aligned. Lumini crystal networks are at full power." Her tone carried equal measures of scientific precision and desperate hope. "Whatever happens next, it's been an honor." Around the nebula, specialized stations powered up, each one a fusion of technologies that shouldn't have worked together. Lumini crystals channeled energy in impossible ways, guided by Kareen quantum engineering. Forge Collective living metal adapted and grew, forming new configurations even as they watched. At the heart of each station, human ingenuity had bound these disparate elements together into something unprecedented. "Confederation vessels are moving to intercept," Rodriguez reported. "They'd figured out what we're trying to do." "The Nexus fleet is advancing as well," Santos added. "They're evolving even as they move, trying to adapt to what they think we're planning." Chen allowed herself a grim smile. "Let them come. For once, their adaptation will work against them." The plan was audacious to the point of insanity. They would use the quantum singularity technology not to destroy or disrupt, but to fundamentally alter the nature of space within the nebula. The Lumini crystals would stabilize the effect, while Carene engineering would guide its shape. The Forge Collective's living metal would allow their ships to survive within the altered space, and the Meridian Swarm's biological insights would help protect the organic beings within. Energy spike, Santos called out. The Nexus are launching some kind of countermeasure. On the tactical display, the Nexus ships began to shift and change, their forms twisting as they tried to adapt to the building quantum energies. But for the first time, their legendary ability to evolve was becoming a weakness. They were trying to adapt to an effect that hadn't yet been fully formed, changing themselves in response to incomplete data. Confederation ships are firing. Rodriguez warned. Their leading edge is entering the quantum field. Chen watched as the massive Confederation warships pushed forward, their weapons blazing. They were desperate to stop what they saw as an unacceptable risk to galactic stability. But they didn't understand what the Alliance had discovered. Sometimes the only way to win was to change the nature of the game itself. All stations, Chen commanded, her voice steady. Initiate final sequence. The quantum matrices activated simultaneously. Space itself seemed to shudder as the laws of physics began to warp and twist. The Nexus ships, caught in mid-adaptation, found their evolved forms working against them. The very changes they had made to survive were making them more vulnerable to the shifting reality around them. The Confederation ships fared no better. Their rigid, unchanging designs couldn't handle the fluctuating nature of space-time. Many began to break apart, their crews desperately retreating from the affected zone. But the Allied ships, protected by their hybrid technologies, held together. The Lumini crystal reinforcement bent, but didn't break. The Forge Collective's living metal adapted in controlled ways, guided by human engineering. The Meridian Swarm's biological ships pulsed with new life in the altered space. It's working, Volkov exclaimed. The quantum field is stabilizing, but it's different than we expected. The Nexus adaptations, the Confederation interference, they've changed the outcome. The nebula now burned with new colors as space itself operated under different rules. The Nexus fleet, caught in the transformation, found themselves unable to escape. Their adaptive abilities, pushed beyond their limits, began to break down. Ships that had evolved to incorporate every technology they'd encountered started to collapse under the weight of their own complexity. Confederation forces are withdrawing, Rodriguez reported, a note of awe in his voice. They're running. Chen watched as the massive Confederation fleet retreated, leaving their former quarantine zone. They had come expecting to contain a threat, only to witness the birth of something they couldn't comprehend. In the altered space of the nebula, the remaining Nexus ships were changing one final time, but not in the way they had intended. Their forced evolution, their desperate attempts to adapt to everything at once, had led them to an evolutionary dead end. They had become too complex, too contradictory, too impossible to sustain. This space, Zix's crystalline form, pulsed with wonder. It's not just changed, it's new, something that has never existed before. The Alliance had created more than a weapon or a defense. They had carved out a new domain in the galaxy, a space where the conventional rules didn't apply, where diversity and adaptation had to exist in balance rather than conflict. As the last Nexus ships either fled or collapsed, Chen looked at the faces of her allies. Human determination, Lumini wisdom, Forge collective ingenuity, Carene insight, Meridian innovation. Each had contributed not just their technology, but their unique perspective on survival. We did more than survive, Chen said quietly. We proved that true strength doesn't come from perfect unity or endless adaptation. It comes from learning to stand together without losing what makes us different. The dawn of their victory painted the nebula in impossible colors, a permanent reminder that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe wasn't the ability to destroy or consume or adapt. Sometimes it was simply the courage to stand, to defy, and to believe that different species could achieve more together than they ever could alone. The war was over, but in the altered space of the Perseus Nebula, something new was just beginning.